Good morning. There are lots of people we know and many people we don't know. We have many of our friends from the Indian subcontinent visiting today as well. And as a brief introduction, I'm Adam Sachs. I'm the Executive Director of Biodiversity for a Livable Climate. And this is part of our mini conference series. And we have with us Walter Jehne, who is in Tasmania right now. Vijay Kumar, who is in, what city are you in at the moment?
Guntur, Andhra Pradesh, India.
Okay. And we have Congresswoman Chellie Pingree, who is not only a congresswoman, but she's a longtime organic farmer and on the agricultural committee. And so the format will be each speaker will speak for 20 minutes, and then the three speakers will talk among themselves. And after that, that will take us to around 10:30. And after that, we'll be open for audience questions. Just put your questions in the chat, and I'll pick as many as I can. So we'll begin with Walter. And we met Walter in 2015 when he spoke at our water conference, and he's been tracking us ever since. And we have over 200 videos on YouTube that have been watched 250,000 times by now, and Walter's is the #1 on that hit parade. So I'm going to let Walter introduce himself, since he knows him better than I do, and then we will proceed.
Well, thank you very much, Adam, and good morning, everybody, because I imagine most of you in the States, it's good morning. Yes, it's basically coming to midnight here because we're down under, innocent bystanders from down under, Soil Microbiology Australia. But the bottom line is, wherever we are, it's just wonderful to connect. And really today, it's a fantastic opportunity to talk about this really critical issue of linking nature solutions to actually strategic policy at national levels. Because we've been, in a sense, in a community talking about regenerative agriculture, natural ecologies, but it's always been a disconnect with strategic policy at the national level. And that's changing. That's changing very rapidly and very seriously, where, even Antonio Guterres, Secretary General, United Nations, acknowledging that, hey, we have to embrace these natural solutions because, quite frankly, they're the only things that we've got left. And Vijay, who's part of our team, and of course, speaking after me, will be in the UN in September, actually talking about a global food security, biodiversity futures forum. We'll talk about that. But what's really critical, these issues, these natural solutions are now front and center. And so really they become the only last chance solution, in a sense, humanity has to address some of these very, very critical challenges before us, whether it's climate change, whether it's a degradation of our soils, whether it's the viability of farmers and regional rural communities all over the planet, but also another one, and of course, nature and COVID has taught us this. Okay, what do we have to do about our preventative health? How do we actually look after the 10 billion people that will be on this planet by 2050, 7 billion in urban concentrations? And what do we do about their preventative health? And really the foundation there is the nutritional integrity of the food they eat. And of course, that food has to come from soils, from farming. So again, this really fundamental role of farming in underpinning the whole health of humanity. Okay, so these are really profound, important factors, and we're all facing these crises. We've spent 50 years talking, modeling, spending money on science, and then denial and delay, effectively not addressing, for example, the climate change we're facing. And of course, it's come to the point we now have dangerous hydrological climate extremes that are accelerating, impacting, and in a sense, we have less than 10 years to initiate. I mean, we have to keep going for longer, but less than 10 years to initiate the changes, because if we don't, we've got these dangerous hydrological extremes, whether they're floods, hurricanes, droughts, wildfires, aridification, that are actually threatening and impacting our biosystems now. So we are getting into a very serious crisis point. And I think the significant thing is that national leadership around the world is recognizing that we need to change the paradigm. You know, we've had 50 years of, in a sense, locked in inertia. And what is it we can do and what is it that we must do to change those paradigms? And in a sense, it's our discussion amongst ourselves. What are those issues and options and performance measures that we need to look at? But then more importantly, actually, is opening that discussion to a Q&A, to a wider debate with all of you to see, well, okay, what is it that we need to do? Not necessarily just on the ground, but now how do we translate this into mainstream policy changes? And so it's really, yeah, how do we break the inertia? You know, the protection, the subsidies, the externalization of consequences that we and short-term politics is so good at, you know, kicking the can down the road. And how do we actually basically say, look, we are the solution. We have to empower ourselves. We are both responsible, but now we also need to be response-able. You know, so it's really quite a positive message of how do we, yes, empower ourselves? How do we go back to grassroots, community empowerment, regenerative agriculture, natural agriculture, and in a sense, what Vijay is showing, it's just marvelous and groundbreaking, world-class. How do we have communities taking that initiative from the grassroots and in a sense, giving us solutions? Okay, so it's really, that's the main discussion we want to go into. And it comes back to the whole thing, well, where are the solutions? You know, like, what is it that we can do? We had it, of course, well, what is it now? It's 90 years ago that President Roosevelt gave that very, very poignant warning. A nation that destroys its soils destroys itself. And of course, we're in that position where now basically we've been oxidizing carbon from our soils for, well, 8,000 years, but excessively over the last 250. We've obviously got that CO2 symptom in the atmosphere, but basically what it is we can do to avoid that. And really, these are the challenges that we've got to ask, what are the practical solutions that we can do? Basically, how do we find the innovation? How do we document the evidence from the field? Certainly, there's a lot that we don't know, but really, we're only going to find out what we need to do by doing it. Okay, it's taking that practical grassroots experience, documenting the evidence, explaining it as far as we can from the hard science, but then going forward and not letting the lack of perfection prevent us from actually moving forward. And in a sense, this is what innovative leaders all over the world, I mean, it varies from state to state, but whether in New Zealand, India, Australia, the European Union, parts of the US, they're all recognizing that, look, we've got to do this. We need to regenerate. We've got to basically revitalize social enterprise, grassroots communities. We need to buffer and create more resilient biosystems. And basically we have to rehydrate and safely cool the climate. And basically, if we look at how do we do all this in this short space of time? We come back to actually nature. Because if we ask how nature actually created the biosystems, created the hydrology, the climate, and in a sense created the opportunity for our evolution, if we can go back to those fundamental processes of soil formation, pedogenesis, then we've got a chance to say, can we use those same processes safely and naturally to regenerate the earth? And the answer is, of course, yes, we can. And in a sense, that's what this grassroots regenerative agriculture movement has been doing, taking those natural processes and applying those to address these solutions. In doing so, that we need to basically look at a whole series of other performance measures, values that we have to concentrate on rather than what we've done. See, up to now, it's just been industrial agriculture that's been driving it. We've been looking at yields, we've been looking at efficiencies, but we have been disregarding many of the consequences. We've been externalizing a lot of the consequences, the costs, the loss of natural capital, the loss of social capital, and actually how do we turn those around? COVID has actually taught us another powerful lesson, that whereas we had assumed that we had a globalized, or some people assume we had a globalized supply chain, the reality is no, we're extremely vulnerable in that globalized system, and we have to relocalize. We have to revalue autonomy. How do we actually have independent, robust, resilient supply chain, value chains? Because in a sense, we all depend on that for food. There's 7 missed meals between social stability and chaos. That's the Arab Spring. And so really it's that strategic relocalization, but to do that, re-empowering local community, local eco-enterprise to make much more resilient, vibrant, creative, powerful systems. And in a sense, where are the grassroots innovations that we can do to drive that? How do we actually look at the recycling of resources locally, creating value, but in a sense, reducing our footprint enormously? So rather than having a linear extractive mining, manufacturing, use, and then waste pollution sequence, can we actually, as in nature, recycle these resources? And again, our regenerative natural farming systems are doing that. How do we create our own biofertilizer, and how do we actually manage the whole system as a cycle? How do we actually change the regeneration of, instead of oxidizing carbon from our soils, we've lost about half the carbon in our rural lands. How do we actually start regenerating, putting that carbon back into the soils? As we mentioned in the beginning, how do we actually restore the nutritional integrity in our food? Because that nutritional integrity in our food is 90% of our preventative health. Okay, we're at the moment running a $10 trillion a year global industrial food system. Farmers are getting less than 6 cents in the dollar of that through the commodities they produce. But that industrial food system has enormous consequences in terms of our health, our whole community health. So how do we actually take charge of that whole food system, both in terms of producing it, but also in lowering those prohibitive health costs, building, in a sense, higher resilience and resistance to disease, so that we have preventative health outcomes rather than as we're having now with this pandemic risk. Okay, and so these are all the opportunities and the criteria that we need to go to, but just in a sense in bringing it together, we also have a pretty urgent message to give. How do we actually address some of the systems falling apart that is happening now? The collapse of systems. Jared Diamond's made that very clear, that basically civilizations collapse. Most civilizations throughout history are found in the dust of archaeology. There's only a very few that have actually survived for much more than 300, 400 years. And all of them have survived because they've actually adopted these natural farming practices of recycling nutrients, maintaining soil health, maintaining productivity, hydrology, resilience in their land. And again, how do we actually start looking at that lesson, both from nature and in a sense what Jared Diamond showed, how do we avoid that collapse? Because otherwise, again, we end up in the dust of history. And so really, when we brainstorm this, there's 8 key strategies or 8 key imperatives that we've really identified. And I'd like to introduce those or discuss those, and then let's have some wider discussion about them. The first thing we have to do, we have to start urgently buffering the intensifying dangerous hydrological climate extremes. You know, in a sense, as we said, the cyclones, the floods, the droughts, the aridification, the wildfires. They are at the moment actually intensifying, and they're taking out biosystems. And most of you, many of you live in North America, and the forests and the biosystems, whether it's on the West Coast, British Columbia, California, Alaska, you know, it's amazing and dangerous. And so how do we actually build the buffering of these dangerous hydrological extremes? And in a sense, to do that, how do we regenerate the Earth's soil carbon sponge? Okay, so how do we basically create the buffering through the sponge to make sure that the soil has enough moisture and can infiltrate, retain, and make available enough moisture in this buffering effect? We also then, of course, have to prevent the loss of these biosystems, for example, through wildfires. And again, here's nature. Nature uses fungi to break down these forest fuels, turn them into stable soil carbon, and of course, therefore avoids these wildfires. And we're still trying to fight this, you know, burning oxidation system with water bombers and what have you, but it's not viable anymore. So how do we get back to nature to avoid things like wildfires? And then we've got to secure our food essentials. Again, we mentioned it for the 10 billion people. And in a sense, urban agriculture has an enormously important role to play. So how do we re-empower urban agriculture to play that role? How do we empower young grassroots communities, often without soils, but to get into urban agriculture, because that's where a lot of that nutritional food comes from. That's where a lot of the preventative health comes from. Thanks to what Vijay is showing us with pre-monsoon, monsoon dry seeding in India, Andhra Pradesh, can we go back and can we regenerate large areas, 1 billion hectares of the 5 billion hectares of man-made desert and wasteland we've created on this planet? Vijay is going to show a film from the United Nations Commission for Combating Desertification. And in a sense, yes, we can, but really that's an enormously powerful challenge, because if we can rehydrate, regenerate, regreen some of that arid wasteland, 40% of the planet that we've turned into man-made desert and wasteland, then that has an enormous impact, not just food security, but also for hydrologically cooling the planet. So these are some of these critical, in a sense, lifeboat strategies that we need to adopt. Behind it all, though, we've also got to stop, in a sense, false accounting. You know, we've got to really bring valid accounting systems in. So instead of subsidizing and protecting the status quo by externalizing the consequences of our maladministration, we've got to really bring these all onto the balance sheet and say, look here, valid accounting, we're stopping the subsidies, stopping the protection, and use some of those savings to catalyze and stimulate these regenerative practices. If we do all this collectively, especially this sort of natural soil, carbon, sponge regeneration, drawdown of carbon, extension of green 365-day plant covers. If we do the sums, there's no question we can regenerate Earth. We can draw down over 20 billion tons of carbon per annum globally, and that takes us into negative net emissions. At the moment, we're releasing about 10 billion tons of carbon net each year, and if we can put this regenerative agriculture in, we can put that all back into the soil. And that's a critical thing. It's carbon accounting, but carbon accounting to rebuild the sponge, to rebuild the hydrology, because that's giving us the natural safe cooling that we need. It's 1.2 degrees centigrade average global warming so far. If we hit 1.5 to 2 maximum, we're going to tip over a threshold. Business as usual is taking us to 4 to 6 degrees, which is complete game over, right? So it's really the issue of regenerating Earth, taking that carbon from the air back into our soils to rebuild the hydrology, to rebuild the cooling, and doing that through regenerative agriculture. So it's an enormously positive, good message. Yes, we can. We have the knowledge. Regenerative agriculture can do it. The thing that's limiting is time. We've got to initiate these things in the next 10 years because otherwise these dangerous hydrological extremes, oxidation, degradation is going to accelerate and deny us that opportunity. So it's that 10 years, that window of opportunity. It's now working, not just with natural farming systems, but with national policy leaders. And basically, it's so exciting to have that debate opening now with national policy leaders to say, right, how do we practically, profitably make these changes? You know, we've got to get off the Titanic. We've got to get out of the water with the white pointers. We've got to get into these lifeboats, and we've got to basically start making it happen. The solutions are there. We are the solution. The solution is in our soils, and it's just a matter of taking the responsibility, being responsible, and doing it all together. And that's what we're here to try to help make happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Walter. And now let's hear some responses from our other two speakers. Chellie, would you like to start off with some of the ideas that Walter has put forth?
Sorry, it took me a
That's
minute to get my technical work back. Well, very quickly, thank you so much, Walter, for your presentation. And I've taken copious notes, so I think everything that you said really spoke to the challenges that we're facing. Just a couple of things that I think are important. I really appreciate the way you narrow things down into helping people understand this is a sponge, we have to reactivate it. And really the connection about these are hydrological events. I think it's sometimes hard for us to understand the expansive concept of water. You know, we understand water fights that happen out west and who's going to get the water, but the very idea of the importance of water on our planet, and since I represent an ocean, a district bordered on the ocean in the Gulf of Maine, where it's warming at a rate faster than anywhere else in the world, you know, it's critically important that we understand this role in the hydrological cycle and everything else. So thank you. I so much appreciate that. And a couple of other things that you mentioned, and I'll probably get into a little bit more when I'm speaking, is just helping us all understand that it's critically important that we move to practical solutions, and that we can't always get perfection in the first day. And I know this is always a challenging conversation in politics because we all come to understand what the ideal would be, but these are slow moving systems, and we can't let them languish or procrastinate, you know, or some of the things that you say we're really caught in right now. but we just have to start moving on those first steps, and everyone is critically important. And as you've mentioned, this public debate has changed tremendously. Again, I can probably talk about that a little bit more, but from when I first started as an organic farmer in 1971, and it was such a marginalized, just disregarded practice in many ways. And now, people have a much greater understanding of the dangers of climate change, the importance. And I think we're starting to understand the importance of soil. So I think those are a couple of points. And I just really appreciate and hope we can get into, some of your other suggestions about just, the practical policy changes we need to be making. And that certainly I focus on in my work in public policy.
Yeah. Look, thank you, Chellie. And your point about the water is very important. It's a very powerful enabling discussion. See, we've had 50 years where we've been focused on the symptoms, CO2, and seeing it as pollution or something negative. And sure, we have to reduce our emissions. But CO2 is basically, some 4% of the heat dynamics of the planet in nature. But also CO2 will take centuries because the oceans have got this enormous buffered sink of CO2 that will re-equilibrate with the air. And by understanding the hydrological link, if we can take CO2 from the air, build the sponge, then we end up with a 20 plus multiplier in terms of directly cooling the planet, transpiration and these processes. So really we are empowering and giving actually humanity now that chance. Yes, we can safely, naturally cool through rebuilding the sponge, through rebuilding hydrology. And we're not just saying it, Vijay is doing it. You see, so when we'll see that film and we see that green vegetation growing, even if it's a hectare, it's actually transpiring. Every gram of water that's transpired is taking 590 calories of heat energy from the surface back up into the air and out to space largely. And if Vijay does that over 1 billion hectares, which we can do, we can cool the planet. So wonderful.
Thank you, Walter. Vijay, do you have some response to Walter and Chellie that you'd like to add?
No, I just wanted to pick up. I'm in agreement with what Walter has said, and we've been working so closely. There is one thing which Walter said, and if he can just amplify it a little bit, is about the link between the nutritional integrity of the food and our response to COVID-19, because that I think is a very, very valuable lesson for everyone. How important the nutrient density of our food is, and there's, in addition to the climate dimension, there is our own survival, which is linked to what we are eating.
Yeah, look, thank you, Vijay. Now, this is a delicate subject because we're not pretending that we're coming in and countervailing the medical advice, right? We're in a pandemic. Therefore, yes, these are very serious, urgent medical situations. We've got to react. But it is also very real. There's about 1,200 viruses that impact humans. And they're in nature, they're everywhere. And so it's a lot of issues of, yes, we've got to sort of stop or try and limit the amount of infectivity, but people are going to get infected. And then the real issue is how resilient are they? How much can they defend themselves against these viral infections? And that very much links back to their actual preventative health. Can they resist that infection? And at the moment, we're actually in a really tragic situation. There's 8 billion of us at the planet at the moment. There's about 1 billion of those people who don't have enough food, not because we can't grow it, because they can't afford to buy it. There's about 2 to 3 billion people that are massively overweight, obese, or, like eating the wrong food. But perhaps 4 billion of us, 5 billion of us are subclinically malnourished, we are now getting often less than a third of the nutrients, especially the trace elements in our industrial food, that our parents did prior to the Second World War. And that loss of nutritional integrity in our food has been directly associated with the exponential rise in our diet-related diseases, you know, whether it's diabetes or cancers or cardiac diseases, autoimmune diseases. These have been rising exponentially from the 1950s with that compromising of the nutritional integrity of our food. And I think we are just creating populations that become extremely vulnerable to these viral pandemics. In nature and previously, we had that resistance, and a lot of that was associated with the nutritional value of our food, because these trace elements are essential for making enzymes, and these enzymes, and we can go into specifics, you know, each enzyme has specific functions, but these are very important in actually controlling disease within our own physiology and preventing that. So yes, it's going back to these natural farming systems, back to nutritional integrity in our food, and that's so significant in savings in our health, well, our health or disease industry that's being fostered at the moment. Basically, as I understand in America, some 17–18% of GDP is going into health. And even that's only covering a percentage, you know, perhaps half the population fully. So we can't sustain these sorts of costs. So we've got to get back to preventative health, and the nutritional integrity of our food and the way we grow food is important. There's lots of epidemiological evidence of communities who have been growing healthy food from healthy soils have got far lower incidence of these diseases, even though these diseases are present. And so I think we've got to learn from that. But that's a very critical area, but we're not taking anything away from the current emergency of actually basically limiting infection through social distancing, mask wearing, and of course, getting a massive rollout of vaccines to give humanity the best chance it has to prevent this pandemic getting any worse.
So that leads us, thank you, Walter, that leads us into Vijay's section. I'll just say a little bit about Vijay. He is the Agriculture and Cooperation Advisor to the government of Andhra Pradesh in India. He directs the implementation of natural farming in the state and has dedicated years to social and agricultural projects that empower communities and alleviate poverty. From 2000 to 2010, he led the Society for the Elimination of Rural Poverty in Andhra Pradesh and led the mobilizing and empowerment of 11.5 million rural poor women into thrift and credit-based self-help groups and their federations, enabling them to come out of poverty. From 2010 to 2015, he was the first mission director of the National Rural Livelihoods Mission for the government of India, with a vision of mobilizing 100 million rural women into self-help groups and federations. He has been Special Chief Secretary, Agricultural Department in Andhra Pradesh, and after a time in 2016, he was appointed as the advisor to the government in agriculture, where his work supports the Andhra Pradesh community managed natural farming movement. And Vijay, please tell us more about that.
Thank you, Adam. And I'm so happy to be here with my co-panelists, Walter and Representative Chellie. It's an honor to be with both of them. And thank you so much for inviting me. I'll have a presentation to make. It's, Walter has given the overview. I just want to say what we are doing in Andhra Pradesh and how important it is for us and the rest of the country. It's a 6-year effort. I'll take you through what we have done in Andhra Pradesh. Adam, this is visible. Can I proceed?
Yes, looks good.
Okay, thank you. So nature solutions as national policy, and it's very appropriate that we have this event on 5th June, the World Environment Day, and it's very, very appropriate that we are discussing these issues, and they concern the lives of the farmers that you can see in this picture. The vision of our state is to take natural farming to all 8 million farmers and farm workers in the state of Andhra Pradesh, India. This is India, and this is where we are, the southern part of the country. We have a population of 54 billion people. We have a very long coastline, and we also have a very semi-arid area in the southern part of the state. So we have 8 million farmers and landless farm workers. And I should also mention that 86% are small farmers having less than 2 hectares holding. So this is both a challenge and an opportunity. So this is our context. We have rainfall here around 550 millimeters and goes up to 1200 to 1400 millimeters in the northern side. Now, why did we get into natural farming? Why did we see the reason for this change was acute distress of farmers and the quality of food that the consumers were getting. And more important was, as Walter pointed out, the continuous degradation of the soil, the water stress, water emergency. So you had a crisis, multiple crises, farmers' distress, consumers' health, and environmental crisis. Now, these are all interrelated. And I think the most important thing was we understood that even though these seem as disparate problems, they are all coming out of the way we are dealing with our own soils. And so can farming in harmony with nature, can it be the solution to these multiple crises? Because you may say, what's the link between a health crisis and a farmer's distress and soil degradation? But I would like to say that all of them are interrelated. And that is our effort to solve these multiple problems by going into the root causes. And natural farming is that holistic land management practice that leverages the power of photosynthesis in plants to close the carbon cycle and build soil health, crop resilient, and nutrient density. Walter said that we have to bring the CO2 in the air into the soil to create this soil carbon sponge. And how do we do that? These are the principles of natural farming, and these are universal. They are applicable in all the countries. And the photosynthesis process is the critical one. So the first principle is, to keep the soil covered with living crops 365 days of the year. And where it's not possible, at least cover it with mulch, and have crop diversity. Incorporate trees in the landscapes, in the farms, 15 to 20 crops. Do not disturb the soils, integrate animals into farming. And one uniqueness in Andhra Pradesh in India is the role of biostimulants. They are, acting as a very, very essential catalyst to trigger the activity below ground and increasing amount and diversity of organic residues, including crop residue mulch, using indigenous seed, and pest management through better agronomic practices and botanical extracts. So these are the 8 principles, and we have 9 red box, no synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, weedicides. So these 9 principles are universal, but practices are again very location specific, context specific. And I'll just take you through what are our practices in Andhra Pradesh. So as I mentioned, the first one is to keep the ground covered. And this is something, I'm eternally grateful to Walter for highlighting the role of photosynthesis, the root exudates, and the soil carbon sponge. So this is our recommendation to farmers, not to keep the ground barren and have multiple crops within. So you have here a mango orchard with intercrops, similar, and another mango orchard with cereal crops. This is a seed coating inoculum from cow dung, cow urine, some lime and handful. So this is the inoculum. This is the seed inoculum. Then this is a soil amendment. Again, there's cow dung used, cow urine, jaggery. So this is a soil microbial inoculum where the farmers use this to trigger the soil biology. This is a liquid inoculum used for once in 10 days to 15 days. And these are the pest management practices. You can see here they're using neem leaves. We have more than 200 botanical formulations. Farmers are quick to innovate and make these botanical formulations. There are also agronomical practices, mechanical ways of trapping insects. The idea is not to use chemicals. Again, we are encouraging farmers to protect their own seeds and also conserve indigenous seeds. So this is the biodiversity, local seed sovereignty that we are encouraging. And this is something which, comes to the water cycle part. How does natural farming impact on the hydrology? And where the soil carbon is low, the soils are non-porous and non-permeable. But with the soil biology being activated, we actually have porous soils. We also have, we improve the water holding capacity. And the third factor, which is extremely critical to what we are doing, is harnessing water vapor for irrigation. And this is something we'll be eternally grateful to Walter for educating us on this. So in tropics, he told us there are 10 rivers of water in the air, and you have up to 50,000 parts per million of water vapor. So we tested this hypothesis of whether natural farming will enable the crops to get this, to harness this water from the air. And it's about third year of our experimentation, and we've been extremely successful. You can see here one plot of land which was completely degraded. It's I think almost 10 years since this land was cultivated. And you see the women farmer here. She has laid out this wooden mulch, and she has covered the soil with crop residues, and she has sown this 10 to 15 kinds of seeds with the bio-inoculum, and you can see the germination. And this is what I call as the miracle of pre-monsoon dry sowing. And this is where these plants are actually harnessing water from the air. And our objective is how can we build year-round 365 days green cover and thereby regenerate soils, reverse the land degradation. This is again her crop. And mind you, this is the first year of the regeneration exercise. I just want to show one film. It's made by the United Nations Commission for Combating Desertification. It's a 2-minute film. It will just give you a sense of what we are doing.
అట్లే వస్తుంది సార్ జీవామృతం స్ప్రే చేయడం వల్ల. వర్షం కూడా లేకపోయినా ఈ మల్చింగ్ ద్వారా అది ఎప్పుడు పచ్చగానే ఉంటుంది, కాయ పూత ఎప్పుడు జరుగుతూనే ఉంది సార్. మాకు 25 రకాలు రోజు కోయడం రోజు అమ్మడం జరుగుతుంది సార్. రోజు డబ్బులు రావడమే జరుగుతుంది. అందువలన ఈ 50 సెంట్ల 60.
That gives a flavor of what our farmers actually go through, how they are producing these crops, reversing the degraded lands. I'll just complete the rest of my presentation. So this is our footprint now in our state. We cover about 28% villages and 10% farmers and farm workers, so 750,000 farmers. And in the current year, we are targeting around 1.1 million farmers and farm workers. And this is funded by the government and by philanthropy. Azim Premji Philanthropy is funding this whole program. And in terms of impacts, if you look at, typically people look at yields and the costs of cultivation. And then, so we have been doing independent assessments. These have shown that there is very significant reduction of costs. The yield differences are not significant. In many cases, the yields of natural farming crops are much higher. There is significant increase in the net income for all the farmers. But in addition, farmers have reported better soil health, crop health, biodiversity, resilience, economic empowerment of farmers. This is a snapshot of the yield story. This is this 2019 season. And you can see majority of the crops, these are all our most important crops. 9 crops account for 80% of our cropped area. So majority of the crops, the yields of farmers doing natural farming are higher. In some of them, they are lower. But the net income is very significantly high. And here we see the resilience to floods. We had a series of heavy rain incidents and floods last year. So the plot grown with natural farming practices was able to withstand these floods. And we also have a household homestead gardens. These are for everyone, but a special focus on the landless farm workers because they don't have any land. So this is the practices in their homesteads so that they can get nutritious food throughout the year. And this has been especially helpful to them during the Corona crisis because they could get the diverse crops in their own homes. And you can see here, we see very significant improvements in biodiversity. And it's wonderful the way nature comes back if we don't, destroy it. And yeah, so this program has had a series of innovations all coming together. And I would say in terms of the several important innovations, government support has been very important. And I think for anything to scale up, government support is a must, both in terms of ground level implementation, but also at policy level. And then our investment in taking this knowledge in a farmer-friendly manner to the villages through videos, through print material, and also our focus on research. Then at the grassroots level, our most important, strength, foundation has been the women self-help groups and their federations. And the knowledge extension system is not a top-down system. It's a farmer-to-farmer extension system. And we also realize that this is a long-term hand-holding required for this transition, because we have to change a mindset of last 60, 70 years that it's only through chemicals that farmers can do farming. So that requires very good grassroots-based organizations working with farmers. So you have government, you have NGOs and community-based organizations doing this hand-holding support. And we learn continuously from the farmers, from their own innovations. And we have strong collaborations with global and national institutions. And within the government, there is great understanding that this is very important in multiple dimensions, not only farmers' livelihoods, but health of citizens. So we have a program where we are taking it to the schools and also in centers for, where pregnant women, nursing mothers get nutrition support. So different government departments are collaborating with us. And just to highlight the importance of the women self-help group movement, something we started 20 years ago in our state. And in the program area, about 120,000 of these women self-help groups, representing about 1.4 million women, are at the center of supporting the program through a variety of ways, through collective action, learning from each other, planning, management of the program, financing the individual farming plans, and taking into account vulnerable farmers. This is how the meeting process happens on a continuous basis in the villages. And we have a farmer-to-farmer extension system. You see the women here, Sarojini. So her word is respected in the village because she herself is a best practicing farmer. So we have an army of around 6,000 such community resource persons who are involved in this exercise. And as I mentioned, we spend up to 8 years in a village to ensure that there's transformation of the entire village. So this is very essential. It doesn't happen in typical government programs. So our specialty is to ensure that this continuous support, because this is knowledge intensive agriculture. This is not input intensive. So that takes time because it's unlearning and relearning process. So this is a hallmark of our project. So I'll conclude here by saying that we do not inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. So it is for the sake of our current generation and the next generation that we all have to come together. And I'm really so happy to present this experience of ours here. Thank you very much, Adam. I conclude my presentation now.
Thank you, Vijay. I somehow have the feeling I've just been presented with a package of miracles. And the question is, how do we present that package? Well, I'm sure Chellie will have some thoughts about how do we present such a package to the land of the free and the home of the lobbyists.
It's true. Do you want me to weigh in on that? Because
Please do.
yeah, well, that's certainly one of our big challenges, and it's often quoted that there are actually more lobbyists on Capitol Hill who work in the agriculture and food sector than the defense industry. So that just put it into perspective a little bit. And I thought that was very helpful. First off, Vijay, that was a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much for your dedication and hard work around this, and real connection to making your state successful in this. So I can see that's a lot of years of hard work. And really fascinating presentation about how this works on the ground. But I did think when we got to the end and you had a chart of the things that you have to change, the vested interests, which in our sense, for us as lobbyists and already money-making entities, but the mindset of, we can't make any changes here, getting it to every farmer and the hand-holding, and the best way to do it is farmer to farmer. So many of those are exactly the same fundamental principles in the United States. We think of ourselves as big, commercial agriculture, but frankly, in a lot of parts of the country, one of the reasons it's hard to change is there's no other farmer in the community who's doing that. Nobody wants to be the first one to take the risk, to step out, do it something differently. Plus, you don't have someone to talk to about, wait, what did you do when this happened? And so I really appreciated that you quantified it village by village and, thought about it in that way, and converting one farmer is how you get to the next one. So there's an awful lot of principles there that are really just fundamental to what, in a sense, we're trying to do in our country, but what we have to think about on a much bigger scale. And I think people start to run in the opposite direction sometimes because they think, well, we could never do this in the United States because we're too big and too entrenched. But basically, you're talking about exactly the same things. I wanted to ask you a couple of questions about, and the last thing, I just really appreciated the focus on women and understanding, what big change makers they are. And frankly, in the United States, many more women are getting into agriculture, and we don't always think about it in that way, but the importance of that. Just a couple of specific, I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about, what were the vested interests and what do they continue to be that you're fighting against, or that sort of inability to change. And back to the inoculants, I apologize, but I don't know what jaggery or pulses are, but I'm curious to know what those important ingredients are in that inoculant.
Okay, I'll first deal with the inoculum ingredients. They're very simple ingredients. There's cow dung, cow urine, handful of uncontaminated soil, because it has to multiply the microbes in the soil. So jaggery is like molasses. It's like source of sugar.
Huh.
So many farmers actually use overripe fruits which can't be consumed by them. So you need a source of sugar, and pulses are lentils. Like I don't know how peas, for instance, peas.
Yeah.
So lentils. So that's a source of nitrogen, and then it's fermented for about 5 days. So you have a solid inoculum, then that's available for 6 months. It's got a shelf life, but the liquid inoculum needs to be used almost immediately. It's again fermented for 48 hours to 72 hours. Farmers know when it is ready, and then that's diluted with water 1:10, and then applied in the fields. There are again variations of this, but essentially, Chellie, the idea is to multiply the inoculum which are there in the soil, because we have depleted the soil biology. So the logic here is, can we trigger that soil biology to come back quickly? In fact, both the women that you saw, one in the film and also the one who, all the restoration happened in the first year itself. It hasn't taken much time. So that is again the beauty of this process. Coming to vested interests, it's a, we are dealing with it in the sense because it's a farmer's choice. So we are not forcing them. For instance, the farmers who are doing natural farming, they're not getting any extra incentive from the government. So there's no cash subsidy being given if you get off the chemicals. So it is a voluntary choice being made by the farmers that, even though in fact, it's a reverse. The fertilizers are getting subsidies. So the government is actually spending huge money subsidizing chemical fertilizers. And the farmers who are making this transition, they're not getting any cash incentive. They're getting nothing. It's their own internal satisfaction. But in the future, we want to reward these farmers on the basis of the economic services, ecosystem services, because they're helping the entire humanity. We owe it to them. So the point that Walter made about externalization of costs, so we made those costs zero So we need to reward these farmers. So in fact, I hope all of us can join in having these kind of principles, that farmers should be rewarded for the services they are rendering to humanity. I always tell my farmers that you are gods, because you are gods, you are giving us food to eat, you are giving us good health, and thanks to innovation of harnessing rainwater, so you're also gods of water. And more important, in a Hindu mythology, we have Lord Vishnu. So this Lord is supposed to maintain humanity. So we tell the farmers that, you're doing that work, because what you're doing is going to save all of us. So we need to find out ways of compensating them, but not through, of course, premium for their produce is, again, a market phenomenon. But regardless of that, we need to have a system of rewarding farmers. Thank you, Chellie.
Thank you.
Walter, do you have a quick comment to make before we have Chellee's presentation?
Yeah, look, very, very quickly, but we'll come on to perhaps. It's not a miracle. I mean, like you presented, it's a miracle, you see, and this is a real issue. No, it's reality, but we look at it and we say, look, we don't understand. And Chellie made the point that there's a lot that we don't know, but that doesn't mean we can reject the evidence in the field. And so really what Vijay has done with this, and we saw that in that UNCCD film, that, yep, here are crops growing where there shouldn't be crops growing. Things are growing productively where it shouldn't. And we've got to say, look, why is and how is this happening? And this is actually the opportunity for us in the Western agricultural model. How are these plants getting the water they need when it hasn't rained? How are they getting the nutrition that they obviously have got to be that luxuriant green when we're not adding fertilizer? And so this is challenging us to say, look, how do we look at these natural solutions and take them into policy, but bring this new knowledge to do it? And that's really been actually the exciting journey, where we've gone to the academies and what have you, and we've worked through and explained how this is working. And we'll come back into that. But I think that's the important thing, that it looks like a miracle, but it's reality, and it's a reality that provides a solution for the future globally. So let's now open our mind to how do we understand what makes it work, and how do we apply that wider. But let's come on to that later.
Oh, I just want to briefly say that one thing that jumped out at me, Vijay, from your slideshow was the picture of the land where there had been these huge storms, and you had a field which was just, crop high with water, and the one underneath it, which is natural managed regenerative farming, where you couldn't see any water at all, because it all went into Walter's soil carbon sponge, right? And so that's where it comes from, and that's how it's preserved. And even though that land, I assume, had been dry without a lot of rain in the previous several months, it was all ready because of the way it had been taken care of.
Yes, Adam, I think we are seeing many farmers switching over to natural farming, because they are seeing that, the natural farming fields are more resilient to floods, to droughts, and especially this harnessing water from the air is still, seen as such a great phenomenon. I just want to say one point. I agree with Walter that we need all scientists to accept the farmer's reality as reality, and then try to give us an explanation of why it is happening. Because as per the current, agriculture science, that lady's field should be barren. There should not be a blade of grass. But you can see that, she's actually making 4 to 5 times the money that she was making without this intervention. So current science doesn't explain it. So therefore, I think all of us really need to look at the how do we accept farmers' reality and find solutions for that.
So you wouldn't agree that because current science doesn't recognize it, that it doesn't exist?
You saw the reality yourself. I mean, that lady, there should not be a blade of grass. It didn't rain. So
Okay,
Yes.
well, Chellie, let's move on to you. I'll just say something briefly about what I have learned about you as an organic farmer for decades, and having gone through the Maine's House of Representatives, winding up in Congress on the House Agriculture Committee and the Committee on Appropriations and its Subcommittee on Agriculture. So you have come through your knowledge of agriculture. I don't know if the hard way is quite the way to put it, but certainly through a way that's deeply built on experience, which, you know, you got to wonder about Congress sometimes, about having experience on the things that they're talking about. But you have, in your time in office, pushed for changes to the agricultural system, including creating a robust labeling system for consumers to be able to better identify organic products, supporting farmer-led efforts towards agricultural resilience. And that includes your Agriculture Resilience Act, and is aiming at empowering farmers and reaching net zero emissions in the US agricultural sector by 2040. So why don't you tell us more about how did you pull this all off?
Okay, well, thank you so much. I'm really honored to be on the panel, and thank you for inviting me. And so pleased to be here with everybody today, and really grateful to have heard from the previous speakers and have them share knowledge and have this exchange. So yeah, I will try to take this a little bit to the policy side and talk about the federal level. And just briefly about me. I represent one half of the state of Maine. We have 2 members of Congress, and I've been in Congress for 12 years. I actually was born in Minnesota. Yeah, sure, you betcha. But I came to Maine as a teenager, and actually came as a back to the lander. In the 1970s, there was a big movement of coming to Maine and living sustainably on the land. After doing that for about 2 years, I was fortunate to attend the College of the Atlantic in Bar Harbor, Maine, which is an environmental college. And I have a degree in human ecology, which sounded a little obscure at the time, but has been very valuable to me. I put some effort into learning more about sustainable agriculture during my college years, and was lucky enough to have Elliot Coleman as one of my teachers. He's one of the premier organic farmers of our time. And so that was a great way to get a start. And I was also very active in the beginning of MOFGA, Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association, which also is a steadfast organic agricultural association. I was the first farm apprentice there, and I helped them to start their farm apprentice program, which was extremely valuable to me. I did serve in the Maine legislature. It was an unlikely beginning in politics. I had been a farmer, and someone literally came to my farm stand, and I somehow got recruited to run in a very Republican district. I'm a Democrat, but I think my farming background and small business background helped me with that. And then I was lucky enough to make it to Congress and be a member of the House of Representatives for the last 12 years. So just a couple of things about my arrival. In 1992, I came in with the election of Barack Obama. I'd done a lot of work on healthcare and healthcare availability in the Maine legislature, and I assumed that would sort of be my pathway, even though I had an agricultural background and was very interested in it. But the first thing I found out was that there were a tremendous number of members of Congress who wanted to work on healthcare and healthcare policy. They were all more senior than me and had more experience, and literally no one who wanted to work in sustainable agriculture or saw this as their focus. The Ag Committee wasn't even a very popular committee. And so I was lucky enough to gain a seat there. Since then, I've become a member of the Appropriations Committee, which is a wonderful place to be able to work on policy and funding. And I do serve on the subcommittee on agriculture, so I work a lot on that. And I'm also the subcommittee chair of the Interior Environment Committee. So I work on all of the issues of the Department of Interior, of our tribal relationships, of the EPA, our public lands, and the National Forest Service. So it's a great position to be in. Just quickly, from my time in the 1970s and when organic agriculture was marginalized, it was sort of considered a hippie Birkenstock, granola kind of thing to do, and nobody thought much of it till today. Organic food is a $60 billion industry in our country, and people are so much more aware of the consequences of conventional farming and also the consequences in our diet of what we take in. So I feel fortunate to have seen this tremendous amount of change and really do feel we are poised at an important time to tie these two important issues of climate change and how we grow our food and our food system. It's important to understand that we have had 4 very, very difficult years in the wilderness. And I can't express enough how challenging it is to reverse some of the damage that was done, the denial of science, of data, of the very fact of what's going on to our climate, and the real dismissal of the important role of government. I'm very pleased we have a new administration that's come in with that as their goal. And while we all may not, agree with everything that they've done, they've brought experienced people to work with us. And that is a sea change over the last 4 years of working with people in executive branch departments who are just there to destroy the departments that they led. But I like to think about it as like a huge ship and you're trying to turn it around. And first you kind of have to get the brakes on, you have to slow it down, stop it. We're in the turning around phase, and hopefully pretty soon we can get going in the right direction and then increase our speed, because as we all know, this is a crisis and we have to move as fast as we possibly can. And we have a new administration who's come in this job in the midst of a horrific pandemic, a worldwide pandemic, and the importance of getting us, all, not only in the United States, but around the world, back to a healthy state. And also political unrest and assault on our democracy and voting rights, and a challenging inability to get anything done in Congress. So it's not an easy time. The one thing that was important that we did in the House over the last 4 years was there was a special select committee on climate change, and I commend their report to you. It goes through everything around clean energy and transportation, but it does include, importantly, sections on agriculture and natural solutions. And that's something I worked very hard on. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my bill, but just getting even caring, concerned people who believe in climate change to include a section on agriculture, and even to begin the importance of soil health and organic matter in the soil and the ability of our soil to sequester carbon is a quantum leap. I mean, it's unusual. I get to speak to a group this morning where this is the focus, because even now with many of our environmentally concerned organizations and people, this isn't considered serious. I often say that too many people and organizations try to narrow this down to say, we'll fix climate change by planting a tree and no longer eating meat. And I think for many of the people on this call, and I certainly know my fellow panelists understand that we cannot plant trees all over our agricultural land. It's critically important. And just saying you're never going to eat meat denies some of the important things that can have with pasture raised livestock and the important, viable life cycle, and, just eating meat-based pretend meat that's created out of soybeans that come from a rainforest that we just destroyed is not a solution to our problems. It's just so much more complicated than that. I'd say one other, getting our environmental organizations focused and understanding on all of this, and all of our good-minded people, but also Congress. Because we have had so many years since the debate around public policy has been an important part of our conversation. Even the best of my colleagues often are not comfortable with the debate around what are we going to do to fix climate change? What are all these complex things? I liken it to the fact that we've had to debate healthcare 60 times over the last 4 years because the administration was trying to repeal our healthcare bill. So we're all very well versed in, keeping your child on your plan and having pre-existing conditions being covered, all these things that are fundamental, but we don't have that level of conversational ability around climate change, and that is really important. So I want to get to my bill, and I'll just say I have been fortunate to either serve on the Ag or Ag-Appropriations Committee for the last 12 years. I've worked on 2 different farm bills, and I will be a part of the next one coming up. And I can't talk about all the things that I work on in there because I want to focus on this topic, but I've been very engaged in the organic label certification, what constitutes as organic, imports of non-organic food, the research, the transition dollars. Those are all critically important. I have a real emphasis on local agriculture, on accessing more of our food locally and regionally. And I created a program called LAMP, which brings together a lot of the subsidy for small to medium-sized farmers to help them to change their practices and to grow. I've been working very much on more locally based slaughterhouses as we've consolidated our meat processing and packing. And one of the vital things, if you're going to have pasture-raised beef, is the ability, or any pasture-raised meat, is the ability to get it to a slaughterhouse. And people increasingly want to buy locally grown food. And one topic we've touched on a little bit, but I won't get into too much depth, but just the very huge crisis of hunger and nutrition in our country. We should not be the wealthiest nation in the world and ever deny anybody food. And the political fights that go on every year over SNAP benefits and WIC, the subsidy programs that allow people to put food on their table and not even subsidize them at an adequate level is horrendous and embarrassing that goes on in our country. But I'm a big supporter of the programs. I've worked a lot on school lunch and school lunch nutrition. And I'm also the co-chair of a caucus called Food is Medicine, where we deal with some of the very principles that were being talked about the importance of healthy food, the connection between what is in our diet today and what it costs us in the healthcare system. It's a bipartisan caucus, and it actually has gotten some traction. And we have programs like the produce prescription programs where there are trials going on out there where a healthcare practitioner can actually prescribe, a financial support for fresh fruit and vegetables. So these foods, which should be eminently affordable and are more available. Okay, so lately I've of course been very interested in the convergence of climate change and agriculture. I've always been very concerned about climate change, but I decided that this was the moment in time to really try to put these pieces together. And I wrote a bill a couple of years ago called the Agricultural Resilience Act. It took us a lot of research and literally over 100 meetings with, from conventional agriculture to soil scientists to practitioners, really to try to put it all together. It's a practical kind of bill. It's based on a lot of USDA programs that already exist, but could be changed or adapted or better funded or subsidized and incentivized in the right way, not the wrong way. So let me just tell you about a few sort of a little bit about what it looks like. I just reintroduced the bill with Senator Heinrich from New Mexico. So we have it active and engaged this year and are working very hard to move it forward. And I'll talk about that. The 6 titles in the bill, it's a long bill. The first one is around research. And it has everything from cultivar research on, what kinds of seeds and animals are going to be most resilient to the things that we're dealing with today, and also really supporting what the USDA already has called climate hubs, which are regional in our country and play a big role in disseminating information and research. My second session is just about soil health, and I don't have to talk about the importance of that, but it has grants to states that are working on soil health programs, and many of the states have moved far ahead of the federal government. So that's an important role that they're playing. It directs the USDA to get more engaged in soil health, and they're already in the new administration looking at the potential for carbon markets, a whole variety of ways to incentivize and support farmers in those ecosystem services, as Vijay was talking about earlier. It also looks into some of the USDA programs, and I talked about that. We subsidize a lot of the wrong things, and most people know that about the Farm Bill. But there are ways that we could incentivize doing the right thing, and also change some of our programs. So for instance, crop insurance, which is one of the big subsidies that goes on right now, how money gets disseminated to a lot of agriculture today, but we could have performance-based measures in there that reward farmers who are using good conservation practices. And that's something that we could easily do. The third section is around farmland protection and farm viability. We're unfortunately losing farmland at a rapid rate. And so we kind of have two parts of this. One is the agricultural conservation easement program. That's an important way to help protect farmland, to make it possible for farmers who are ready to sell or move on or retire, to have their land put in an easement and to financially support that so it can stay a forever farm. It's also got a viability section where we really help, we fund more of our local agriculture marketing program, because there is such a huge interest in local farming today, but it's often hard to make a living. And there are a lot of ways that we can support that, whether it's value-added products that farmers make or better marketing, particularly now as people are more interested in doing that. So those are both really important things. Just to put it in perspective, when we lose farmland, we lose this ability to sequester carbon in the ways that we've been talking about this morning, but also most likely it's turned into development land. So it's paved over, there's concrete, there's houses. We're just putting more carbon into the atmosphere at a time where we should be using it for the reverse. My section 4 is around pasture-based livestock. Again, there's a lot wrong about the way we raise most of our meat in this country, commercial agriculture, feedlots. I don't, again, have to explain all that to people, but permanent pasture, perennial grasses, check off a lot of the boxes that we've been talking about earlier today to sequester that carbon, to keep it in the soil, for the soil to always be covered. And frankly, grass-fed beef, or any grass-fed animals, but particularly beef, is far better health and nutrition wise, because you don't have the irritation to the system. A cow that is meant to only eat grass and processed grass in that stomach. When you introduce corn or soybeans or other things, you do a lot of things to that meat that makes it less healthy for you. So that's important. Unfarmed renewable energy just helps to support our farmers in their own ability to put solar panels on the roof, or a small wind tower, or an anaerobic digester that might process some of the manure on the farm and turn it into both energy and a soil amendment. And the last one is food waste. And I was reluctant to get engaged in the food waste issue a long time ago. And then I learned that we waste 30% of the food in this country, which is a huge challenge. And that's 30% of the food actually in the entire world. So that's not just wasted food, that's food that should go to people who are hungry and doesn't. And it's also a waste of the water that goes into production. It's a waste of the transportation, and particularly in our country where we move food all over the country. So a couple of things I've worked on are trying to standardize date labeling. As you know, often you pick up a package and there's a label on it. And in our country, that's just an arbitrary label. There are no standards in this country. So you don't know if you're supposed to throw it away or if you can still eat it, but it's just not going to be as tasty. And so it's surprising that something that sounds so minor could have such a major impact on how much food we throw away, particularly in a wealthy country like the United States. In other countries and other places in the world, it has to do with adequate refrigeration and other kinds of loss that happen when food is transported. But we're very engaged in that and trying to get the USDA to do more around public education, to support municipal composting and other kinds of waste systems that keep that waste food from turning into methane gas in a landfill, but become a productive product. So anyway, it's a long bill and there's much more to it, but that is sort of the overview. And often people say, well, how will you get this big bill passed? And just a little bit about the mechanics of Congress. It's very rare that you can take a huge bill like that and just pass it, particularly if you're trying to introduce a lot of new concepts or move forward on new funding. But we use it as a marker bill, as a way for people to see a broad range of things that we need to be thinking about and do, and then take little pieces and try to slip them into other bills or to get them funded. As I said, I serve on the Agriculture Appropriations Committee, and we've already gotten funded increase for some of the programs that I've talked about, the food waste, the climate hubs, the local marketing program. We're coming up on another farm bill, and that's what happens every 5 years, and that's where major policy changes. So we have a lot of this out there and are vetting it and working on it and building support for it, both with farmers, with researchers, and with consumers, so that we'll be building that support and able to move much of it into the farm bill if we're still on this track. And I just want to say, as a political aside, I can't tell you how important it is that we have a Democratic administration when we write that farm bill, or let me just say at least a climate friendly, and hopefully continue to have majorities in the House and the Senate, because it's not the same working with the other side. And we learned that over the last 4 years. There are many, many bipartisan supporters of the work that we're doing. And in agriculture, I work on a lot of bills that Republicans and Democrats alike support. I've got co-sponsors who live in Nebraska and California and Kentucky. So it is a very bipartisan issue, but sometimes when you get into the highly politicized climate change language, it can be hard to do. Another way that we're trying to work this through right now is related to the infrastructure bill that's going through Congress right now. And we've been encouraging in the writing of that bill for so many of the things that we talk about to be considered an important part of our infrastructure. If you get down to the most basic of this, soil is an essential part of our infrastructure. And in a sense, you know, based on a conversation like this today, you could make an argument that said how we treat our soil, the health of our soil, the ability to maintain it and increase the organic matter in it is more important than the roads and the bridges and all the other things that we often think about. Oh, that's what we have to spend our money on. It's a lot easier to get money to build a new highway than to just increase the organic matter in the soil or to educate farmers how to do it. So all of the things that we've been talking about today, as I said before, are really important principles. Having, you know, education, moving scientific materials into practical knowledge for farmers, helping them to make those changes by having a lot of boots on the ground and people out in the field, doing it in a way that it's understandable and friendly to farmers. You know, we all want to see industrial agriculture change, but a lot of farmers are out there at the end of their debt limit, at the end of the risk of their family, at the, you know, the end of losing their family farm. And if we don't support them in making this change, they'll never have the benefits of all the things that we talked about, better resilience to the horrendous storms that they're seeing every day and they know are challenging, better yields, better water retention to withstand the droughts. You know, there's just a lot going on out there. I just want to quickly mention, because in the overall picture, we're talking about natural-based solutions. And because I have oversight of the budget of the Forest Service, the National Forest Service, and because Maine is the most forested state in the nation, we're almost 90% forested, and most of it is privately owned land, not public land like we have out in the West. I'm very deeply engaged in the important policies around sustainable forests, making sure our forest practices are regenerative and are building on new forests, making sure we have innovation in what our future forest products will be. We will always have harvesting of our forests, but we have to be good about, you know, a good biodiversity and how we replant and restock our forests and how we encourage new growth. And also in our state where we've had a huge economic downturn, losing paper mills because we don't use paper as much anymore. The conversion to innovative products in our state has really been forward thinking. We're about to go online with a wood fiber insulation facility, which will make home insulation out of wood fiber, a biochar facility, and that's an important soil amendment and a great way to use that product. Crass laminate timber, which is now is used in buildings and it's as strong as steel. It's allowed in buildings up to, I think, 12 stories. And one important thing to remember about the appropriate use of wood products that are grown in sustainable forests, this is not clearing down the rainforest, this is New England forests and forests in the country that can be well managed, is that you have locked that carbon into the wood. Trees are a wonderful way to store carbon. And when you lock it into the wood and you put it into a building, a commercial building or a home, it stays in that wood. And that's a really important thing to remember when you're thinking about, oh, we'll just plant more trees or we'll never cut a tree. But in fact, impact compared to using concrete or steel, which use a lot of fossil fuels in the making of them, and then outgas as they're in a building. So you have to put it in a different perspective and really think about the practical way about going about doing it, and not just let's never cut a tree again, because we're going to keep cutting trees and we can use them in a valuable way. Lastly, being a coastal representative and having a fishing industry like lobster fishing be such an important part of our economy and our culture, the rate of warming in the ocean is dramatic. It's terrifying. The acidification in the ocean, which is having a huge impact already on our shellfish, our ability for oysters to make shells, and many of the things that we depend on, and many of the economic things. It's really important that we have an emphasis on blue carbon, using our oceans, whether it's mangroves or tidal marshes, seagrass, or one thing we're really emphasizing and trying to expand in Maine is the growth of kelp, and using that as a way to extract carbon and store it in the kelp, either use it for animal feed or use it to store in the ocean. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done around that. It's not well understood even at NOAA and within the programs that we work on, but we have to tackle this on all fronts. And food from the sea is not that different from food from our agricultural soils, but we have to think very carefully about how to do this. But we depend on the oceans right now to absorb the carbon that it does. And if we don't take care of them at the same time we're doing all these other things, all progress will be lost. So in summary, I'm really lucky to work on these issues. I like to think that if there is any silver lining of something as horrific as a pandemic, it has forced all of us to think more about how broken our food supply chain is, how broken our healthcare system is, the nutrition of our food, the impact when it comes to a pandemic, and perhaps to sit back and think a little bit that it's really important to have a country that respects science and data and government in our ability to help resolve some of these huge issues. And most importantly, if somebody tells you something very, very bad is going to happen, you have to believe them. We didn't understand that when it came to a national health crisis. And if we don't start believing when it comes to climate change, the impact will be far, far worse and much harder to turn around. So that's it. That's everything from me. And again, thank you so much for letting me be part of this important dialogue.
Chellie, thank you. As one who is cynical about the way our government pretends to work, you are a true inspiration as someone who understands the breadth and the depth of some really fundamental issues. And I also think that the way you present yourself, I suspect you can persuade a lot of people. And your talk about the bipartisan nature of what you do, we should hear a lot more about that. I mean, it's probably doesn't turn on the newspaper editors as much as the fighting does, but we need to train them too. And one of our members, Bob Labrie, is working with journalists to try to open up that window so that people can start to hear the good news. I mean, Biodiversity for a Livable Climate, we specialize in good news because hardly anybody else does. And it's so important to our emotional health and our ability to go into action that is of the kind that you and Walter and Vijay have talked about. And I've been a climate activist for around 20 years and had conversations with all kinds of people. And I understand how difficult it is to change people's minds when they're made up based on the generally accepted truth. And I think you put the IPCC to shame, actually. But enough from me. Walter and Vijay, what do you think?
Well, look, if I might, yes, Chellie, very, very wonderful, and look, an outstanding long-term contribution across all those fronts. And I've worked also in government, and I know how hard it is to make that, catalyze that change, catalyze the debate. What I really like to be very positive is, how do we actually help you bridge that gap? You know, how do we help you, in a sense, champion those natural solutions more effectively in your national policy debate? For example, I mean, Australia, obviously, we're pretty much at the forefront of aridification. You know, we're getting a 30% decline in rainfall right across southern Australia, has profound effects in terms of productivity and obviously wildfires. And of course, you're experiencing just the same thing, certainly in the southwest, but across large areas of the states, right? Not just drier weather, but less reliable rainfall. And of course, that reliability really makes it very difficult with lots of cropping, lots of agricultural systems. And so what Vijay has sort of demonstrated is, in a sense, look, here in this pre-monsoon dry seeding, this whole concept of, can we harvest water from the air? You know, some of that 50,000 parts per million, 5% by weight of air that is water. And in a sense, how does nature harvest that water? And would it be helpful, you know, just to be a bit audacious, as President Obama obviously championed, and say, look, okay, does the US in the Southwest want to join us in a demonstration project on Yes We Can? You know, here's 1 million hectares of your wasteland, arid wasteland, you know, state land, government lands, and let's put in 1 million hectare whole catchment scale rehydration project to say, yes, we can do this. And both to demonstrate it, but then to allow the interrogation. Yes, we don't have all the answers, but just as we did with Vijay, we stood there in a field and said, look, this is a reality. This is the evidence. We couldn't explain it by the rainfall. What was growing there, the rain could have only produced perhaps 20%, 25% of that biomass. So where did the water come from? Mm-hmm. But can we do that experiment in the Western United States, or even in other parts of the States, Kansas, and say, look, here it is. Now let's invite you to have that interrogation and then explore the minds. Because you see, when Vijay and I, and with the Academy in India, we worked through that to say, yes, here's a sequence of hydrological processes that could explain this. And we could verify those. But of course, these are opening whole new horizons for rehydration that we've never considered. And yet nature uses them all the time. Your cacti in Phoenix absorb all their water from the air. So why aren't we in agriculture? Not all, but you know, how much could we? So look, the invitation, I mean, to help build that bridge, to help reinforce your strategic national policy, to say, yeah, look, here is 1 million hectares as part of your funding. Let's do this pre-monsoon, or harvesting water from the air, or building that water efficiency, and join us in that global challenge of the 1 billion hectares of rehydration, regreening, 365 days, green cooling outcome.
No, that's great. And I think, that, you know, it's a wonderful challenge, and it's a very good idea. And I'll just say, you know, one of the transitions that we're going through is, you know, 4 years of the United States being very insular. And while rejoining the Paris Accord is in many ways just seems like a symbolic act, the importance of us being re-engaged on an international scale is just critically important. We have things to share, but almost more importantly, we have so much to learn. And for instance, you know, just watching, you know, Vijay's slideshow gives people a chance to see firsthand, you know, there's nothing like seeing or experiencing. And just as you said, demonstration projects. This is how we used to change agriculture. This is why we had land grant universities, why we had the cooperative extension service, was all about the opportunity to do the research, to have the practice, and have those who wanted to use the practice able to see what it was going to look like. And so I do think that's critically important. It is high time we had some international challenges around these things to say, well, how is your country going to tackle it? And how are we going to go about and tackle it? And things that people, no longer sort of fundamentally understand, they'll be able to see. I think one of the reasons a critical section of my bill is related to research is we've gotten very far from investing in research. And unfortunately, as many people know, a lot of research gets done that's, funded by private entities who have something to prove about the product that they're selling. And so the importance of government research, of land grant universities being able to go out and do this kind of work. And I think now translating the science that we know is going on into, practical solutions so that people can say, what do you mean you can harvest water from the atmosphere? But just as you said, if a cactus can do it, and, Vijay is proving it's happening. And much of that is exactly what we're trying to support in, in no-till agriculture and cover crops and more use of compost and, all of the things that you're talking about. So yes, I'm on board. And I think that, the other thing I'd say is I'm very excited that we will have a country that is fully participating in COP26, because we have just been on the outside of all of these things. And I know, those can be bureaucratic things and you can't get enough movement, but just the very engagement of, people from our country and our science and our political world, and all engaging with people from all over the world is how you get these dialogues restarted, I think. And having Secretary Kerry and Gina McCarthy, who was the head of the EPA, back in an important administrative position around our climate change policy, puts people back in developing those relationships who have the experience and knowledge to move us forward, not to just kind of destroy our international relationships. So very important. I'm in.
Yep. Very good.
Yeah. Chellie, I'm so inspired by what you're doing, what you have done, what you're doing. And, I really wish all your plans come true. This is extraordinary. I have not heard this from a politician for a very, very long time. Having a long-term perspective is very difficult.
I'm sorry, Vijay, we're not going to give her to you.
No. You're so inspiring. I'm really, it's such a wonderful experience. And also you are a farmer yourself. So it comes so naturally to you. And let me say how important it is for the world that US is engaging in climate change dialogues, whether it is the COP26 or the Paris Accord or the UN Food System Summit. I think, Chellie, it's extremely important. The link between agriculture, climate change is actually brought to the fore, because it's like connecting the dots. If we don't do that, this climate change is seen as only a matter of being fixed by renewables, and whereas the big opportunity we're losing by not fixing agriculture. And also one request to you is, the world over, most of the countries have agreed that agroecology is required, but the US government still has not taken a positive stand. So this is something, we really hope and pray that this is something that can be sort of, because it will help other countries to modulate their stand. Because I was, present in some of these discussions of the UN Food System Summit, and everybody is hoping that US also would make a change in their stand. So this is my special request to you. Use your, good offices, your bipartisan approach and science-based approach to sort of do this. And any partnerships, we are very happy. If there's anything that we have done, we can share with you and answer questions from your colleagues. And anybody who is a skeptic also, we are very happy to be of any help that we can. Thank you.
Great, great. Well, I look forward to working with you.
At this point, let's turn it over to some questions from our audience. Several people have asked about, well, just how do you pull water out of the air? So Vijay, and maybe each of you has something to say about that.
Yeah, I think Walter should go first because he's the guru.
Ah,
No,
Walter, I
no,
didn't know. I
He's
hadn't
the
heard
teacher
that.
and I'm the student.
No, an innocent bystander from Down Under was the line, right? But look, no, actually, see, for that question, thank you very much. It's very important because, in a sense, yes, as we said, 50,000 parts per million, 5% by weight, rivers of water flowing across all the planet continually, including all the world's deserts, and it's there. And of course, nature harvests that. And of course, it harvests it very simply, and because nature, she's just got very, very simple things to do. And she does it by hygroscopicity. Big word, but all it means is it just sort of sucks water out of the air. So if we have things like salts, right, they will actually then absorb water to themselves. And so in Australia, for example, we have things like salt bushes, right? And these salt bushes are just harvesting water from the air. We've also talked about Arizona and the cacti, the succulents. And again, they're just harvesting water from the air. A lot of plants actually have very, very elegantly evolved designed leaves that actually act as condensation surfaces. And of course, they are then just condensing water onto their leaves, and then of course running that water down and of course into the soil, absorbing it. And we already know, because if a plant is transpiring, to transpire water, it has to actually have heat to turn that water from liquid to gas. And so the leaves are actually cooler surfaces. So they actually can become very effective condensation surface, cooling condensation surfaces. And so, yeah, nature has evolved a whole series of those processes to harvest water from the air. But something that actually Vijay demonstrated with pre-monsoon dry seeding was actually even more sophisticated than that. I mean, it's fair enough, here's water from the air, but these were seeds, as you saw in the demonstration, they were putting seeds with biostimulants and mulch into effectively dry soils. And those seeds were germinating. And of course, again, we sort of said, well, where's the water coming from for the germination? And of course, it's again, nature's just, she's so exquisitely effective and simple and elegant. Because we know from photosynthesis, when we produce biomass, we take 6 grams of CO2 and 6 grams of water, and with sunlight, photosynthesis combines that to make 1 gram of biomass. But when we add organic matter to the soil, each gram of organic matter is actually biochemically holding not just carbon, not just holding energy, the solar energy that was converted, but also holding that 6 grams of water that was used to make that 1 gram of organic matter, right? And so if you have microbes that are breaking down that organic matter slowly, those microbes are releasing 6 grams of metabolic water. Okay, so organic matter is a marvelous, powerful thing we totally don't recognize. We look at it and say, oh, look, it does some carbon sequestration, but it's a store of carbon, it's a store of energy, and it's a store of water. 6 grams for every gram of organic matter, slowly broken down. And that's more than enough water for that seedling, that seed to germinate. Okay, and so here we have nature using the slow, controlled breakdown of organic matter, which Vijay has added as mulch, and he's of course biostimulated the microbial ecology in those soils with the stimulants that he's added, and they are very, very precisely generating metabolic water for the germination of those seeds. Now this is profound, you know, like, I mean, we basically, okay, we look at this in plant physiology and we make the assumption that for every gram of plant tissue that we grow, we need 1 liter of water. You know, that's roughly the global mean glasshouse conversion. But here's nature doing it quite the opposite. It's generating water by breaking down organic matter to then grow more biomass. So, you know, nature's so much more clever than we are. And this is the point. We just have to be a bit humble and then look at these processes and say, hey, we can use these in agriculture, but more importantly, we can use these to regenerate green plant covers 365 days of the year over vast areas of arid wasteland. And that's, in a sense, the opportunity and the offer that we were making to Chellie. You know, can we actually show you 1 million hectares of Western US and let's turn it green? And then let's invite everybody to it and say, well, is this real? Yes, you're standing in it. How did it happen? Let's open our minds.
So, Chellie, that's already happened in areas of the American Southwest, right? I mean, we can start with Alan Savory and all the people that the Savory Institute has taught, and many others. Is there enough evidence there to give this a push in Congress?
You're absolutely right. There are good examples out there and some good science. And I think the terminology around regenerative agriculture is becoming, you know, more a regular part of our conversation, and we're moving forward on this. I think we're just trying to get ourselves to a tipping point so that we're, you know, moving all these things sort of forward at the same time. And it's a convergence of a lot of things coming together, literally, you know, how this administration moves forward, what our own USDA decides to set up as priorities, what the next farm bill looks like. I mean, I think we're kind of moving towards that point, but I can't say specifically, but it certainly seems like a viable idea to create a bigger demonstration project. Based on what we already know, set aside some of the, you know, the Biden administration has a big initiative, 30 by 30. So preserve 30% of our public lands by 2030, which is tomorrow, into, you know, really virtually. And I think in our ability now to think that through with that as an overall lens, you know, there's so much public land, and there's plenty of public land that is arid, unusable soil. So it's a perfect convergence. I don't have it, you know, all thought through, but I think there's a way that we could be doing that.
Okay, well, here's a question for all three of you. We talk about soil carbon so often in terms of measurement, but we're really looking at the systemic impacts, and it's not all about measurement. How can we adjust our policy assessments on other than metrics, not to exclude metrics, but there are so many other important things that happen when you've got your soil carbon sponge going. How do we shift the evaluation and assessment?
I think we should not look only at carbon, Adam. We should look at what is happening to the crops. what is happening to the nutritive value of the grains produced? How is it impacting on the water cycle? So if we expand these matrices into what I call, which everyone calls the ecosystem services. So there must be a way of measuring the multiple dimensions rather than one, just a simple unit of carbon in the soil, because it's doing so many wonderful things, bringing biodiversity back. So how do you measure that? How do you value that? And improvement on health. So I think there is like Walter said, the true cost accounting, because right now we're doing false accounting. So we need to get into true cost accounting. So I think there could be a solution by looking at the multiple benefits that come out of this process, rather than just measuring it in units of carbon. Of course, that also happens. But in addition to that, there are so many other gains that are happening. So that need to be described and measured, and also measured in a way that's not the effort of the farmer. It should be done in a very seamless manner. So in fact, that's also my struggle. I don't want the farmer to be put through all these difficulties, and especially our farmers are smallholders. So there must be a good way of measuring. So maybe some research is required in these measurements, right? And we can actually see that our farmers are telling me our health is improving, earthworms have increased. So what is the value of that to society? Yeah, thanks.
Walter, you have something to say about that?
Yeah, look, I fully support.
I'm sorry, it was a silly question from me.
No, fully agree with what Vijay said. And your point, look, we've got to bring it down to the qualitative functionality of that carbon, right? Because at the moment, we're just looking at it as a money-making thing. Here is actually, basically carbon accounting on a balance sheet, but it's the actual quality of that carbon. If it is converted into the sponge, if we say, look, yes, this is the sponge that we're generating, then that has enormous multiplier benefit. Every gram of carbon that's held as humates or glomalin in the sponge, just in its own matrix, can hold 8 grams of water. It can hold over 20 grams of water, that 1 gram, by improving the physical three-dimensional soil structural matrix. Okay, so it has this enormous multiplier benefit. And so it's the quality of what type of carbon, where it is, under what circumstance. This, when you go to an arid area, as we've just been talking about, is profound, because that extra gram of carbon, by keeping that extra water, massively increases, and this is a real measure now, the longevity of green growth of that biosystem. 365 days green vegetation cover, okay? And so what we're really saying is, carbon, the right carbon measured the right way has these massive multiplier effects through hydrology, and that gives you longevity of green, which then has a multiplier effect in drawing down more carbon from the air, because you've got the hydrology to keep more photosynthesis happening. And that's how nature very rapidly basically extended vegetation right across the 14 billion hectares of land on this planet 420 million years ago. And we can do that as well. Okay, so it's this force multiplier through soil carbon, rehydration, 365-day green, longevity of green cover, and then more photosynthesis. And we've got all the metrics, we've got all the measurements, we can do that. It's just basically, again, helping our policy leaders understand that, look, let's just not have a crude carbon accounting and have all sorts of dodgy figures and dodgy accounting coming onto compromising that, but really get at the quality functionality, which is hydrology, longevity of green, and more photosynthesis.
Okay, that's a really good wrap up from Walter and Vijay. Chellie, would you like to have the last word here?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, thank you to the person who asked the question, because this whole issue of the metrics and how we measure carbon is a little bit of a logjam in the public policy conversation, because I think that we are somewhat stuck on that. And there's an enormous debate going on about what's the method, how do we measure it? How do we not make it the responsibility of just the farmer? As Vijay mentioned, will small farmers be left out because they don't have whether it's complicated equipment or ability to do the testing, and what tests will be valid? And how do you account for the fact that there are different soil types and they might store different amounts of carbon? And there's just a broad range of questions that are going on. But from my perspective, I'm giddy with the idea that we are having a debate about how to measure something that we didn't used to believe was important. And I truly believe that if we're able to move down this pathway, the debate and the conversation will get far more sophisticated, and it will be about things, that Walter was just trying to explain to us, about how much water you're also sequestering in that soil, about ecosystem services, just the broad range of looking at, how does more organic matter in the soil prevent more runoff and loss of topsoil, and provide better resilience during drought, and increase yields, and a whole variety of things. So it is the focus of a lot of things, but I think that kind of moving through that is an important part of getting ourselves to the other side of this being more common agricultural practice. Because when you talk about the massive scale of American agriculture, it's back to my big ship analogy. We're just still trying to get this ship turned around, and we can start speeding up once we're headed in the opposite direction with research and broader thinking. But that tipping point is getting us around that corner that we're actually acknowledging things. And I think, again, we are at that moment, because I've had so many conversations with scientists, with commercial interests, and I think we have to right now, we have to harness all of them. And just to look at it in another way, I think that big change like this comes from, to a certain extent, how we regulate. What kinds of rules and regulations do we have that require certain things to happen, conservation practices. And regulation is often the hardest thing for government to do, because you're telling people what to do. And so you have to have a lot of profound impact going on and understanding of that to get general agreement, that you're going to have a regulation. So that's important. And incentives, even though people are often bristle at the idea of incentives, that is sometimes how you get a commercial entity like a farmer to adopt new practices, to make that transition, to take on the financial risk. And another part of it that I think is really important and has really grown in influence is what happens in the marketplace. So consumers are increasingly becoming aware of climate-friendly agriculture and starting to ask questions about, well, if I'm going to buy this soy burger, where were those soybeans grown? I want to see the whole chain of everything that's going into my food production. And so I think, one reason that's become important, and the measurement side of that, is because we don't want greenwashing to go on. We don't want to have a label that says climate friendly food with no standards behind it, or an ability for everybody to say, well, this is what I call climate friendly food. This is what I call climate. So defining some of these benefits with metrics, which is why ecosystem services is good, because you're looking at the broad range, but it does involve a certain amount of how do I know you're really adding organic matter to your soil, or did you just say you did? And then when I left your farm, you plowed it all under and left the ground exposed for 300 days a year, or, so anyway, that is, this is one of the cruxes of this moment of time and being able to change. And, everything that we've talked about kind of helps figure out how we're going to fit all those things together and get ourselves to a more sophisticated conversation about, greening the world again.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks to all three of you for a most enlightening morning or evening or night or wherever you were on the world. And I suppose we owe a measure of thanks to Zoom for making it possible for us all to come together. And I just want to thank our audience. We have hardly lost anybody throughout this conversation. And that's a measure of success in my mind. And I just want to put in a little plug for Biodiversity for a Livable Climate. We have been doing this kind of education and opening up vistas for people over the past 8 years. And we would very much appreciate any support you can send our way. Moral support is great, but we also need cash. So if you go to our website, bioforclimate.org, bio4climate.org, and click our little donate button, we will gratefully accept whatever you can afford to give. And we'll have another one of these mini conferences we expect in September, and we'll keep you posted, and possibly another one again in November, along with our weekly featured creature posts, which if you haven't seen, you're in for a treat, which is they are written by our younger staff, and they do a great job in all kinds of things, and they help make this possible, et cetera, and so forth. And so I celebrate all of you and our staff, and Bob Labrie and Christopher Haynes, who actually pulled this event together. And I didn't, as executive director, have to hardly do anything. What a treat that was.
Yeah. And Adam, look, and let me thank you on behalf of all of us, basically for that work you do and of keeping that debate going. And we very, very much appreciate it. And so does the planet in the future. Thank you.